Hyunwoo Park sat in the big glass room where all the aliens made their important decisions. The room was cold and smelled like metal and strange chemicals. Around the table sat creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some had too many arms. Others had skin like rocks, and a few had eyes that glowed in the dark. They were all talking about peace and trade and wars, but they were not really talking to the humans. The human group sat at the far end of the table like unwanted guests at a party. Hyunwoo had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. Every time he hoped things would get better. Every time he was wrong. Today was no different. The aliens were talking about the new trade routes through the Vega system. The humans had built most of the space stations there. Human workers had died building those routes. But when it came time to decide who would control the trade, the aliens acted like humans did not exist. Kenth was the worst of them all. He was tall and thin with purple skin and 4 arms. He came from a planet called Velthar, where his people thought they were better than everyone else. When Kenth spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal through the translation machine. The Vega routes should be managed by species with proven leadership skills, Kenth said, not even looking at the humans. Perhaps the humans can continue their current role as laborers and guards. Bo-Ram Kim felt her hands tighten into fists, under the table. She was the leader of all human military forces in space. Her ships had fought and died to keep these aliens safe. Her people had saved entire worlds from enemy attacks. But to Kenth, they were just guards. Taemin Lee, who spoke for Earth in most meetings, stood up slowly. He was getting old and tired of this treatment. "Respected members of the Council," he said in his calm voice, "humanity has contributed significantly to galactic security and commerce. We have earned the right to participate in these decisions." The aliens looked at each other and made sounds that might have been laughter. Kenth waved one of his 4 hands like he was shooing away a fly. "Mr. Lee, your species is still very young in galactic terms. You lack the wisdom and experience needed for such complex matters. Perhaps in a few hundred years, when you have matured, we can discuss expanded roles." Jin Song was the youngest person in the human group. She had studied alien languages and cultures her whole life. She had dreamed of working with other species to make the galaxy a better place. Now she sat there listening to them treat her people like children who could not be trusted with important things. The worst part came when they started talking about Sector 7. This was a group of star systems near the edge of the galaxy. 2 years ago, a terrible enemy called the Croaxian Horde had attacked those systems. The aliens who lived there had called for help. The Galactic Council had talked and argued for weeks while people died. Finally, the humans had acted without permission. Admiral Bo-Ram Kim had taken the human fleet to Sector 7. The fighting had been brutal. Thousands of human soldiers had died in space battles. Human ships had been destroyed, saving alien worlds. In the end, humanity had driven back the Croaxian Horde and saved Sector 7. Now the Council was deciding who would govern those saved worlds. The aliens were dividing up Sector 7 like it was a prize they had won. They talked about mining rights and trade agreements. They planned which species would get which planets. "What about human representation in Sector 7? Taemin Lee asked. The room went quiet. Then Kenth made that grinding metal sound again. "The Council appreciates human military service, but governance requires diplomatic skills. Humans are better suited for security roles." "We saved those worlds," Bo-Ram Kim said, her voice hard and cold. "Yes, and we are grateful for your service," said another alien with blue skin and too many eyes. "That is why humans will continue to provide security for Sector 7. It is what you do best." The vote was quick and painful to watch. 47 alien species voted on who would control Sector 7. Not one of them voted to include humans in the government. They were happy to let humans die to save the worlds, but they would not let humans help decide how those worlds were run. Jin Song felt sick to her stomach. She looked around the table at all these aliens who called themselves civilized. They talked about peace and cooperation, but they treated humans like useful animals. Smart enough to fight their wars and build their stations, but too stupid to have opinions about anything important. After the vote, the human group walked back to their quarters on the space station. The hallways were full of aliens from different worlds. They nodded politely at the humans, but their eyes showed what they really thought. The humans were servants who had gotten above their station by asking for respect. That night, Hyunwoo Park made an encrypted call to Earth. The message would take hours to reach home, but he needed to tell them what had happened. President Woo Jin Choi appeared on the screen in his office in Seoul. Even through the delay and static, Hyunwoo could see how tired the president looked. "They have made their position clear," Hyunwoo said into the camera. "We are useful as soldiers and workers, but nothing more. They will never see us as equals." Hours later, the president's response came back. "What do you recommend, Ambassador?" Hyunwoo looked out the window of his quarters at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling dangerous space to keep these aliens safe. Human workers were building stations and mining asteroids to keep the galactic economy running. Human doctors were curing diseases that the aliens could not cure themselves. And for what? So they could sit at the children's table while the adults made all the decisions. "I recommend we stop playing their game," Hyunwoo said. The next message took even longer to arrive, but when it came, it was from Admiral Boram Kim's military command on Earth. All human forces are to begin immediate preparation for withdrawal from galactic space. Operation Clean Slate is authorized. Boram Kim smiled for the first time in months. It was time to remind the galaxy what happened when you bit the hand that fed you. The next morning, the aliens in the Galactic Council would wake up to discover that their servants had decided to quit. All of them, everywhere, all at once. The galaxy was about to learn a very expensive lesson about taking people for granted. Dong-Hyun-Yu was drinking coffee in the captain's chair of his cargo ship when the message came through. The new Seoul was docked at Centauri Trade Hub, one of the busiest spaceports in the galaxy. Through his ship's windows, he could see hundreds of other vessels loading and unloading cargo. Most of them belonged to aliens, but about 1 in every 4 ships was human. The message was short and used codes that only human ship captains would understand. All human vessels, immediate recall to Seoul system. Operation Clean Slate is now in effect. No exceptions. Dong-Hyun had been expecting this order for weeks. Every human in space had heard the stories about what happened at the peace talks. They knew their government was getting tired of being treated like second-class citizens. But seeing the actual order still made his hands shake a little. He called his crew to the bridge. There were 12 humans on the new Seoul, plus 2 alien workers they had hired at the last port. The aliens looked confused when Dong-Hyun told them they were being let go with full pay. "But Captain," said Zix, a small, green alien who worked in the engine room, "we are in the middle of 3 delivery contracts. The Altarians are waiting for their medical supplies." Dong-Hyun felt bad about leaving Zix behind, but the orders were clear. "I'm sorry, friend. You'll have to find another ship." Within 6 hours, the new Seoul was heading toward Earth. Around Centauri Trade Hub, other human ships were doing the same thing. The alien port controllers were getting frantic calls as captain after captain canceled their contracts and left without explanation. On the industrial world of Vega 7, So-Young Park was shutting down the biggest factory in 3 star systems. She had been the chief engineer there for 5 years. The factory made everything from computer parts to medical equipment. Half the galaxy depended on what they produced. So-Young walked through the massive building one last time. Thousands of machines were going silent as her human workers activated the shutdown procedures. The alien supervisors ran around asking questions that no one would answer. "Park, what is happening?" demanded Vextar, a tall alien with silver skin, who owned the factory. "You cannot just stop production. We have contracts." So-Young looked at him with tired eyes. For 5 years, she had worked 18-hour days to make this factory run perfectly. Vextar had never once thanked her. He paid human workers less than aliens and gave them the most dangerous jobs. When So-Young had asked for safety improvements, he had told her that humans were replaceable. "The contract is terminated," she said simply. "All human workers are leaving. This is impossible. I will call the authorities," but there were no authorities to call. Every human-run factory, mine, and construction site in the galaxy was shutting down at the same time. The authorities were too busy dealing with their own problems to help one angry factory owner. Dr. Yejin Choi had a harder choice to make. She was in charge of the Galactic Disease Control Center, and there were sick people depending on her research. But her orders were clear. All humans were to return to Earth space immediately. She spent her last day copying important medical data to portable drives. The research on pandemic prevention belonged to humanity, even if the aliens had never admitted it. Most of the breakthrough discoveries in the past 10 years had come from human doctors and scientists. Her alien assistant, a bug-like creature named Thek, watched nervously as she packed. "Doctor, the Helix colony plague samples. Who will continue that research?" Ye Jin looked at the samples that could save millions of lives. The aliens had always assumed they could do this work themselves if needed. Now they would find out if that was true. "You will have to figure it out," she said, sealing the last of her personal research files. The most dramatic withdrawal happened at the Outer Rim defense grid. This was a network of space stations and patrol fleets that protected the galaxy's edge from attacks. For 20 years, it had been mostly run by humans, because the aliens thought guard duty was beneath them. General Su-Bin Lee stood on the bridge of the defense station Genesis 1 and watched her people prepare to leave. Around the Outer Rim, dozens of human-run bases were shutting down. Early warning sensors went dark. Patrol ships headed back toward Earth. Communication relays stopped broadcasting. "General," said her second-in-command, "the alien defense forces are asking what they should do. They don't know how to operate most of our equipment." Su-Bin looked at the star charts showing the frontier. Out there in the dark, the Croaxian horde was always watching for weakness. The aliens had never bothered to learn how the defense grid worked because humans had always taken care of it. "Tell them good luck," she said. The human evacuation was so complete and so sudden that most aliens did not understand what was happening until it was over. They woke up one morning to find that their human workers had vanished. Factories stood empty. Ships sat in docks with no crews. Research stations had been abandoned overnight. Minho Kong had managed the shipping schedules for the entire Vega sector. Without him, cargo ships arrived at empty docks or went to the wrong planets. The aliens tried to use their own people to do his job, but they did not understand the systems he had built. Within days, the shipping network was in chaos. Hey 1. Jung had run the food distribution network for 17 worlds. She knew which planets grew what crops, which species had special dietary needs, and how to get fresh food across vast distances of space. The aliens who replaced her made basic mistakes that left entire worlds without proper nutrition. Jae-Hoon-Oh had maintained the galaxy's communication network. The subspace relays that let different worlds talk to each other needed constant adjustment and repair. Oh had spent 15 years learning every detail of the system. When he left, he took his knowledge with him. The aliens did not even know which relays were most important. On Earth, President Wu Jin-Choi watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Human ships were arriving home every hour. Workers were returning from jobs they had held for years. Soldiers were coming back from distant bases where they had kept the peace. "How many?" he asked his aide. "Over 2 million humans in the first week, sir. Almost everyone who was working in alien space." The president nodded. "And their reaction?" "Confusion. Mostly. Some anger. They're trying to replace us with their own people, but it's not going well." Choi looked out his window at the lights of Seoul. For decades, humanity had spread across the galaxy, working for aliens who saw them as useful but inferior. Now, all those humans were coming home. They brought with them skills, knowledge, and experience that the aliens had taken for granted. "Set up job placement programs," he ordered, "and increase funding for our defense projects. We're going to need better ships." Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, emergency meetings were being called. The alien leaders were starting to realize that something big had happened. Their economies were grinding to a halt. Their defenses were failing. Their technology was breaking down, but they still did not understand the real problem. They thought this was just a temporary setback. They believed they could fix things quickly once they organized their own people to do the work. They had no idea that humanity had been the glue holding their civilization together. Without human workers, managers, doctors, engineers, and soldiers, the galaxy was about to fall apart. The Great Withdrawal had begun, and there was no going back. 2 months after the humans left, Kent was having a very bad day. The purple-skinned alien sat in his luxury apartment on HFY-Prime, staring at an empty glass that used to hold Earth whiskey. The bottle next to it was also empty, and it had been the last one in the entire sector. Before the humans left, Kent could buy Earth whiskey at any store. It was cheap and common. Now the remaining bottles were being sold for prices that even rich aliens like him could barely afford. Worse, the alien-made substitutes tasted terrible. Nothing the other species made could compare to what humans had produced. "This is temporary," Kent told himself, though his voice did not sound very confident. "We will adapt." But adaptation was proving much harder than anyone had expected. On the agricultural world of Series 4, the food distribution network had completely collapsed. Haewon Young had managed food shipments for 17 different worlds, making sure each species got what they needed when they needed it. The aliens who tried to replace her had no idea how complex the job really was. Ships carrying grain arrived at worlds that needed protein. Vegetables rotted in storage while other planets ran out of food. The alien managers kept making the same mistakes over and over because they did not understand the system Jung had built over many years. "How did one human manage all of this?" asked Administrator Vex Cole, looking at charts that showed food shortages across multiple star systems. His assistant, a small blue alien named Pix, shook his head. "The records show she worked with over 300 different suppliers and knew the dietary needs of 47 species by memory." Vex Cole felt sick. They had treated Jung like a simple clerk, never realizing she was running one of the most complex operations in the galaxy. Now, millions of beings were going hungry because they had lost her expertise. The crisis on New Kepler was even worse. The Altarian colony there depended on massive terraforming machines to keep their atmosphere breathable. So Young Park had maintained those machines for years, but when she left, she had not trained any replacements. The Altarians tried to fix the machines themselves, but they did not understand how the systems worked. One by one, the atmospheric processors began to fail. The air was getting thinner every day. Soon the entire colony would have to be evacuated, abandoning a world they had spent decades preparing. "Contact the human government," ordered colony leader Technos. "Offer them anything they want. We need Park back." But when they tried to call Earth, they discovered another problem. Jae-hoon-oh had maintained the subspace communication relays that connected different parts of the galaxy. Without his constant adjustments, the network was breaking down. Messages that used to arrive in minutes now took hours or days. Some sectors had lost contact with the rest of the galaxy completely. The medical crisis was the most frightening of all. Dr. Ye-jin Choi had been studying a dangerous plague that sometimes broke out in the mining colonies of the Helix Nebula. Her research had kept the disease under control for years. But the Zephyrian scientist who replaced her, Dr. Zektar, thought human methods were too simple. "These primitive procedures are unnecessary," Zektar had announced when he took over. "We will use proper Zephyrian medical protocols." 3 weeks later, the plague erupted across 5 different mining colonies. Zektar's advanced protocols made the disease spread faster, not slower. Within days, thousands of miners were sick and dying. The Zephyrian doctor had no idea how to stop what he had started. "Get me Choi's research files," he ordered his assistants. Frantically, "Sir, she took them when she left. The files that remain are encrypted with human codes we cannot break." Zektar stared at the reports of spreading death and realized his arrogance had killed thousands of beings. The simple human procedures he had scorned were the only thing that had kept this plague from destroying entire worlds. But the worst crisis was happening on the frontier. Without the Outer Rim defense grid, the galaxy's borders were completely unprotected. General Subin Lee and her human forces had maintained early warning systems that could detect enemy attacks days in advance. They had coordinated defense fleets from dozens of different species into an effective fighting force. Now those systems were dark and those fleets were scattered and confused. The Croaxian horde had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Their scout ships probed the undefended borders and found them completely open. Within weeks, Croaxian attack fleets were striking deep into galactic territory. The first world to fall was Terminus Station, a trading post on the edge of civilized space. The alien defenders had no warning of the attack. Their ships were not coordinated. They fought bravely but were completely overwhelmed. General Thekmar of the Centaurian Defense Force tried to organize a counterattack, but discovered that none of his officers knew how to operate the human-built early warning systems. The computers were protected by security codes that only humans knew. The tactical displays showed meaningless symbols without human technicians to interpret them. How did we become so dependent on them? Thekmar asked his staff officers. Nobody had a good answer. For 20 years, the humans had quietly made themselves essential to galactic defense. They had not demanded credit or glory. They had simply done the work that needed to be done. Now that work was not getting done, and people were dying. In the Galactic Council chambers, the emergency sessions had become a permanent crisis meeting. Representative after representative stood up to report new disasters, food shortages, communication failures, plague outbreaks, military defeats. The list grew longer every day. Chancellor Vextar, the same alien who had wondered where all their production capacity had gone, was starting to understand the scope of the problem. The humans had not just been contributors to galactic civilization. They had been the foundation that everything else was built on. "We need to contact Earth immediately," he announced to the Council. "We must negotiate their return." But when they tried to call the human government, they ran into the same communication problems affecting everyone else. The message relays were failing, and the few that still worked were overloaded with emergency traffic. It took 3 days for their message to reach Earth, and the response was not encouraging. "The Galactic Council's message has been received and reviewed," came the formal reply from the Human Foreign Ministry. "Earth is currently focused on internal development and is not accepting requests for external assistance at this time." The aliens stared at the message in disbelief. They were offering to negotiate, to make deals, to give humans what they wanted. But the humans were not even interested in talking. On Earth, President Woojin Choi was meeting with his industrial planners. The returning human workers had brought with them detailed knowledge of galactic technology and production methods. Earth's factories were being retooled with improvements that the aliens had never thought to make. "Production is up 40% in just 2 months, reported Minister of Industry Si-Jin Park. "The workers who came back from the Vega factories are teaching us manufacturing techniques that are years ahead of what we had before." "And defense?" asked the president. "Admiral Kim's people have been very busy. The new ship designs incorporate lessons learned from frontier combat. Our defensive capabilities are growing rapidly." The president nodded with satisfaction. For decades, humanity had been working for the benefit of others, while their own world remained relatively underdeveloped. Now, all that expertise was being focused on human needs for the first time. Meanwhile, the galactic economy continued its collapse. Without human logistics experts, trade routes became tangled and inefficient. Without human engineers, factories broke down and could not be repaired. Without human doctors, medical emergencies became catastrophes. The aliens who had once dismissed humans as useful but inferior were learning a painful lesson. In their arrogance, they had failed to notice that their civilization had become completely dependent on the very people they looked down upon, and those people were no longer interested in holding their failing society together. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy was dying. Chancellor Vexatar stood before the Galactic Council and read a list of disasters that seemed to grow longer every day. 15 worlds had fallen to the Croaxian horde. The plague in the Helix Nebula had spread to 3 more star systems. Communication with the Outer Rim had been completely lost. "How many dead?" asked one of the council members, a rock-like being from the mineral-rich world of Quartos. "Current estimates are over 50 million across all affected systems," Vextar replied. His voice was hollow and tired, "and the number grows every day." The council chamber, which had once been filled with proud representatives from dozens of species, now held only half that number. Many worlds could no longer afford to send delegates. Others had simply stopped participating in galactic politics as they struggled to survive their own local crises. Trade Minister Hyo-Ri Bai had once managed the complex network of cargo shipments that kept 47 star systems supplied with everything they needed. Now 17 different alien bureaucracies were trying to do her job, and they could not agree on the most basic procedures. "The Altarians want grain shipments on the 1st of every month," explained one frustrated trade official. "But the Centaurians say they can only deliver on the 15th. The Vega colonies need the same cargo ships for medical supplies, but their schedule conflicts with both of the others. Before Bay had left, such conflicts were resolved quickly through her coordination network. She knew which ships were available when, which routes were most efficient, and how to juggle competing demands. The aliens trying to replace her had spent months arguing about schedules while critical supplies sat in warehouses. The military situation had become hopeless. Fleet Admiral Jong-Soo Kim had commanded the Joint Defense Forces with skill that the aliens had taken for granted. His replacement, a pompous Thrakari general named Vec Thul, had lost 3 more star systems in his first month of command. The Croaxian fleet movements make no sense, Vec Thul complained to his staff. They attack where our defenses are strongest and avoid our patrol routes entirely. What the general did not understand was that the Croaxians were using the same tactical databases that Kim had built over 20 years. The human admiral had studied every enemy attack pattern and created detailed plans for defending each sector. When he left, he had taken that knowledge with him, but the Croaxians apparently had access to older versions of the same information. The research crisis was equally devastating. Professor Yoon-Ji Yang had been working on breakthrough technologies that could revolutionize space travel and communication. The alien scientists who took over her projects discovered that her research notes were protected by encryption they could not break. "How are we supposed to continue this work?" demanded Dr. Plix of the Andromedan Science Institute. "The human research methods are incomprehensible," replied his colleague, Dr. Yexton. "They use mathematical concepts that our finest scholars cannot understand." What they did not realize was that Yang had been developing these advanced concepts specifically for human minds. Her research was based on thinking patterns and mathematical intuitions that humans possessed, but other species did not. Without her guidance, the alien scientists were trying to understand ideas that were literally beyond their mental capabilities. The Council's desperation reached new heights when they discovered that their own building was falling apart. The massive space station that housed the galactic government had been maintained by human engineers for decades. Systems that had worked perfectly for years were now failing one by one. Life support flickered unpredictably. Artificial gravity fluctuated between too strong and too weak. The computer networks that managed everything from door locks to waste disposal were crashing regularly. The aliens trying to fix these problems realized they had no idea how the station actually worked. Finally, Chancellor Vexitar swallowed what remained of his pride and authorized a diplomatic mission to Earth. It was a humiliating admission that they needed the very species they had dismissed as inferior. Ambassador Thixnall was chosen to lead the delegation because he was considered the Council's most skilled negotiator. As his ship approached the Sol system, he was shocked by what he saw. Earth's defenses had been completely transformed. Where once there had been a few patrol ships and some basic monitoring stations, now there were massive orbital platforms bristling with weapons, new ship designs that looked far more advanced than anything in the galactic fleet moved through coordinated patrol patterns. The entire system hummed with activity and purpose. "Request permission to approach Earth," Dixonal transmitted. The response came from a human voice that was polite but firm. "State your business and submit to escort. No unauthorized vessels are permitted beyond the outer perimeter." The alien delegation was escorted to a space station orbiting Earth's moon. As they docked, Thixnall noticed that the station was new, and it was enormous. Human workers moved with efficient purpose through corridors lined with technology that the aliens did not recognize. President Woo Jin Choi received the delegation in a conference room overlooking massive shipyards where dozens of new vessels were under construction. The human leader looked relaxed and confident, very different from the desperate aliens who had come begging for help. "You have been busy," Thixnall observed, trying to keep his nervousness out of his voice. Choi smiled coldly. "We have had time to focus on our own priorities for once." The negotiations that followed were brief and deeply humiliating for the Council delegation. The aliens offered everything they could think of: full Council membership for humanity, territorial concessions, access to alien technology, favorable trade agreements. Hyun-Woo Park, who had once sat at the children's table during council meetings, was now Earth's Secretary of Interstellar Affairs. He listened to their desperate offers with barely concealed amusement. "Let me understand this correctly," Park said finally. You want us to save your civilization, fix your economy, defend your borders, and maintain your infrastructure. In exchange, you are offering us the privilege of being treated as equals rather than servants. The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. When stated so bluntly, their offer sounded pathetic even to them. We realize we may have underestimated humanity's contributions in the past, Thicksnall said carefully. Underestimated? Park's voice was sharp. You treated us like useful animals, smart enough to fight your wars and build your machines, but too stupid to have opinions about how they should be used. President Choi stood up from his chair. Gentlemen, you seem to be under the impression that we need you. Recent events suggest otherwise. Through the conference room windows, the aliens could see more human ships launching from the lunar shipyards. Each vessel was larger and more heavily armed than the standard galactic designs. It was clear that humanity had been developing military technology that far exceeded anything the Council possessed. What do you want? Thicksnall asked desperately. Choi looked out at the stars where human civilization was finally free to grow without interference. We want you to leave us alone. Find someone else to do your work and fight your wars. Humanity is no longer available for exploitation. The alien delegation left Earth with nothing but a formal statement that humanity was withdrawing from all galactic affairs permanently. As their ship headed back toward the dying center of galactic civilization, they carried with them the knowledge that they had destroyed their own society through arrogance and contempt. Behind them, humanity continued building something new and better, something that did not depend on the approval of species who had never valued their contributions. The galaxy was learning too late that humans had not been junior partners in galactic civilization. They had been the architects who held it all together, and now they were building something far superior without the dead weight of ungrateful allies. 1 year after the Great Withdrawal, the galaxy had split into two very different worlds. In the core systems where the Galactic Council once ruled with arrogant confidence, entire sectors had gone dark. Half the outer rim now belonged to the Croaxian Horde, whose fleets moved freely through space that had once been heavily defended. The remaining Council worlds rationed food and medicine, while their leaders met in emergency sessions that accomplished nothing. But in the Sol system and the growing territory around it, humanity was thriving like never before. Si-Jin Park stood in the observation deck of the New Busan Industrial Complex, watching automated factories work at a pace that would have amazed the aliens. Production numbers scrolled across holographic displays, showing increases that seemed impossible. We are now producing 400% more than we were before the withdrawal, she reported to President Choi during their weekly meeting. The returning workers brought back manufacturing techniques that the aliens never shared with us. We have improved on their designs and created entirely new production methods. The president nodded with satisfaction. For decades, humanity had worked for alien companies using alien techniques to produce goods for alien markets. Now all that expertise was being used to build human civilization. The results were remarkable. Yoo-Jin Kim, the director of Human Science Development, had even better news to share. The research teams have made breakthroughs in faster-than-light communication and quantum computing. Professor Yang's work, which the aliens could never understand, has led to technologies that put us years ahead of galactic standards. What Kim did not mention was that some of these discoveries had been secret human projects all along. While working for alien employers, human scientists had quietly developed technologies that they never shared. The aliens had always assumed they knew everything humans were capable of, but they had been very wrong. The most dramatic change was in human military capability. Admiral Boram Kim reported that the new fleet designs incorporated lessons learned from 20 years of frontier combat. Human ships were faster, more heavily armed, and far more sophisticated than anything the Council possessed. Our defensive capabilities now exceed anything in known space, she told the president. But more importantly, we have developed new tactical doctrines that make our forces extremely effective in combat. The president smiled at his military commander. Have you been in contact with our new friends? Admiral Kim's smile matched his. The Croaxians have been very interested in our approaches to warfare. It seems they share our appreciation for competence over politics. This was the development that had shocked the galaxy most of all. Humanity had not just withdrawn from galactic civilization. They had allied themselves with its greatest enemy. The Croaxian horde, which the Council had always portrayed as savage barbarians, turned out to be quite reasonable when treated with respect. Young Lee had been conducting secret negotiations with Croaxian leadership for months. What she discovered challenged everything the aliens had taught about the so-called enemy. They are not the mindless destroyers that Council propaganda claimed, she reported. The Croaxians have been fighting a defensive war against Council expansion for over 50 years. Their culture values honor, competence, and mutual respect, concepts the Council never understood. The breakthrough had come when Croaxian war leader Theknosh met with human negotiators. Unlike the aliens in the Council, who saw diplomacy as a game of dominance and submission, the Croaxians approached negotiations as equals seeking mutual benefit. Humans understand what honor means, Theknosh had said during their first meeting. You do not demand that we kneel before you or pretend to be something we are not. This is why we can work together. The Human-Croaxian alliance had been formalized with ceremonies that emphasized partnership rather than hierarchy. Both species contributed their strengths while respecting each other's independence. It was everything the Galactic Council had, pretended to be, but never actually was. The new alliance's first major success came when several former Council worlds petitioned to join. The Altarians, facing extinction as their terraforming equipment continued to fail, were the first to formally request membership. Colonial Administrator Sung-Ho Yoon reviewed their application with careful attention to detail. The Altarians acknowledge their past treatment of human personnel and request forgiveness. They offer full reparations and pledge to operate under alliance principles of mutual respect. President Choi considered the request carefully. The Altarians had been among the more reasonable Council species, though they had still participated in the systematic dismissal of human contributions. Approved, he decided, but they will enter as junior partners until they prove they understand how real cooperation works. Within days of joining the alliance, Altarian worlds received human engineering teams who quickly repaired their failing terraforming systems. The contrast with Council incompetence was striking. Human engineers fixed in weeks what alien technicians had been unable to repair in months. More species began to defect from the dying Council. The Quartos mineral extractors, whose rock-like physiology made them natural mining specialists, offered their services in exchange for alliance protection. The Andromedan research institutes, frustrated by their inability to continue human-developed projects, requested access to alliance scientific collaboration. Each new member brought resources and capabilities, but they also had to prove they understood alliance values. There was no room for the arrogance and exploitation that had characterized the Council system. The final humiliation for the Council came when Hyunwoo Park, now serving as humanity's first Galactic Alliance representative, addressed what remained of their assembly. The once grand chamber was half empty, its surviving delegates looking desperate and defeated. You taught us a valuable lesson, Park told the scattered aliens who had once treated him like an unwanted servant. You showed us that we were carrying parasites, not partners. Thank you for that clarity. Chancellor Vexitar, who had once dismissed humans as too primitive for important decisions, made one last desperate attempt to salvage his dying civilization. You cannot abandon us, he pleaded. We are civilized beings. We have rights. We deserve assistance. Park did not even turn to look at the alien who had spent years denying human rights and dignity. You deserve exactly what you gave us. Nothing. Park left the Council chambers for the final time. He could hear Vextar's voice behind him, still begging, still demanding, still refusing to understand that the old order was dead. Outside, the Alliance flagship Incheon waited to carry Park back to the thriving human sectors. The massive vessel was crewed by humans, Croaxians, and representatives from the dozen species that had chosen partnership over the Council's failed hierarchy. Captain Tae Yang Kim, who commanded the Incheon, showed Park the latest reports from Alliance territory. Trade was flourishing between member worlds. Scientific research was advancing at unprecedented rates. Military cooperation had created the most effective defense network in galactic history. The Centauri colonies have requested Alliance membership, Kim reported. They are offering to share their agricultural techniques in exchange for protection and trade access. Park nodded approvingly. The Centaurians had always been skilled farmers, but under Council rule, Their expertise had been exploited, rather than properly valued. In the Alliance, their contributions would be respected and rewarded. As the Inchin traveled through Alliance space, Park could see the difference human leadership had made. Space stations bustled with efficient activity. Trade ships moved in orderly patterns along well-maintained routes. Defense platforms protected every system with technology that far exceeded old Council standards. This was what civilization looked like when it was built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. This was what happened when competence was valued. Over politics and partnership was chosen over domination. Behind them, the remnants of the Council continued their slow collapse. Their remaining worlds struggled with supply shortages, communication failures, and the constant threat of Croaxian expansion. They had learned too late that humans were not just another member species to be tolerated and exploited. Humanity had been the keystone that held galactic civilization together. Without them, the old order had crumbled into chaos and failure. But from that failure, something better had emerged. An alliance based on honor, competence, and genuine cooperation. The galaxy had a new order now, and it worked.